Welcome back to On the Clock. I'm your host, Elisa Gums. We've come to the final part of our four-part series on equity brought to you by Capital One. On the last episode, we talked about what we can all do to strengthen Black and Brown small businesses. Today, we're exploring Capital One's racial equity agenda and highlighting the important work being done to create solutions that build more equitable and thriving communities. Our first guest is engaged in the company's core work, supporting affordable housing, small business incubation, workforce development, financial well-being, and digital access. Please welcome Capital One's Head of Community Impact and Investing, Kerone Vatel. Kerone, thank you for being here with us.
Elisa, thank you so much for having me. I'm still quite the newbie at Capital One, having only been here for 3 months, but I'm excited to talk more about the work that we're doing.
Well, I just mentioned the briefest overview of what you do, so please tell us about yourself and your role at Capital One.
Yeah, so, I always like to start at the very beginning, which is I was born and raised on the island of Jamaica and came to the US for college. And spent much of my career at Capital One, Goldman Sachs, and JP Morgan in a variety of roles covering the credit card business, tech transformation, other operational and strategy roles, as well as risk. And I actually landed at, doing this social impact work. I started doing this work at the beginning of this year because of, my own kind of personal journey in 2020. When in the middle of the pandemic, being incredibly busy with the COVID war room at JP Morgan Chase, my day job, and all of my mom responsibilities as head chef and chore master and tech support, I discovered that I had breast cancer. And it really knocked the wind out of my sails because I am the sort of person who just always adds more things to the plate. And the solution always seems to be to sleep less. And, I forced myself to think long and hard about why this happened and the message that the universe was sending me. And my biggest takeaway was really, I needed to be much more deliberate and intentional about how I spend my time. And so I decided then that I really wanted to invest in a career of helping to harness the resources of great minds that exist in corporations, as well as our financial resources. But really, it's about the ideas and the innovation and the energy to be a catalyst for change in the community. And so I landed at Capital One this summer, where I lead community impact and investment. Our community impact and investment team is responsible for philanthropic giving at Capital One, in addition to our employee engagement and volunteerism. So whether that's hearts and hands volunteerism or the substantive work that we do to, almost do consulting type engagements with nonprofit partners or startups to help them to grow and scale their organizations. As well as partnering with Capital One Ventures on the new social impact investment fund that we've launched.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that. We are all praying for your health and well-being. And if nothing else, it underscores just how purpose-driven your work really is. You mentioned the coronavirus pandemic, which of course has changed all of our work. In one way or another. Corporate responsibility has really taken on a whole new meaning in the last year and a half between the pandemic and George Floyd, the racial justice movement. What is it like for you to be doing this work at this particular time in history?
Alyssa, I have to say that I feel really honored to sit in the seat that I sit in, and I'll be very candid. I spent much of the spring, which was my garden leave, because I was going between competitor institutions, carrying a lot of guilt about it. Because in many ways, to me, this is work that I was just so honored to do. So how did I land in a position where I was getting paid to do the thing that in many ways I think is part of kind of my mandate as a human being, right? To care about the welfare of others and to try to enable a better future for all people in our various communities. I'm so encouraged by the dialogue and discourse that's happening at a corporate level because, having grown up in the financial services world for many years, we were trained and taught not to bring politics into the workplace, not to bring social issues into the workplace. And so this is a moment where we're really pushing past the kind of bare minimum mandates that come with things like the Community Reinvestment Act, which say that we have to invest in the communities where we're doing business. And our senior leaders, but also our associates are demanding, are desperate, are yearning to drive change in a more meaningful and thoughtful way. And I think for many of the folks who have jobs all across the world, we're starting to realize that our compensation, our reward in this life goes so much further than the currency that we get paid in. I think many people are looking to lean into their purpose. And so there's an incredible spiritual awakening that I think is happening across all of humanity. The pandemic bonded us together in a way that we didn't previously imagine. Who would have thought that someone's actions in Mumbai, India, would have implications for a person in South Carolina, USA? And so there's a beauty in that realization that we are so bonded together. I also think, quite frankly, that for many of us who work for corporations, our investors are holding us accountable. Community advocates and activists are holding us accountable. And the people who work in the communities where we operate are looking to see, what our level of commitment is and what we're doing to improve the lives of all people. And this couldn't be a more important time to do this work, not only because of the now very sort of fact-based articulation that so many scholars and journalists and community leaders have made around the systemic barriers to people of all races being able to succeed, but also because this is a moment in time when we are going to see quite a significant spread in the wealth gap between the sort of top earners and the lowest earners. It's unfathomable to think that there are several people walking this planet who are worth close to $100 billion, and we're still having discussions about livable wage. So I'm incredibly excited to do this work. The team at Capital One, and I don't take any credit for this because I've only just gotten here, but I'm so inspired by the work that the team is doing. Last year, as many of you may know, we launched the Capital One Impact Initiative, which is a 5-year, $200 million commitment. But in addition to that, we've also established a racial equity working group that is on a full-time basis focused on this work. So we've developed strategic alliances with, the Obama Foundation, and we're supporting their work with My Brother's Keepers initiative to really increase the impact for boys and young men of color, and helping to convene networks of civic leaders to further catalyze this work. We've co-led strategic partnerships with the Thurgood Marshall Fund and UNCF to impact outcomes for students, who are being educated at our HBCUs across the country. We've worked with the Equal Justice Initiative to help to advance their groundbreaking work through the Community Remembrance Project, and to bring Black narratives and experiences to the forefront of the mainstream, and to really humanize our experiences of Black folks across this country and through the centuries.
It really is a whole new level of accountability, and it's so great to see that coming from the inside in corporations, as you said, from your associates all the way up to your senior leaders. As part of your role, you contribute to the company's mission to change banking for good. What impact does Capital One hope to achieve through your team's work with the community?
Oh, such a great question. I mean, what a mission to have for a company. It is pretty audacious, and I have to say, I was so impressed with Rich Fairbank and Nigel Morris's vision over 20 years ago when I first joined Capital One straight out of college. It seemed audacious. At the time they were so focused on financial inclusion and trying to find ways to dispel long-held beliefs about the people who were deserving of credit, who could responsibly use credit. And they really used data and analytics to serve populations that were underserved or unserved. Think immigrants, women who were recently divorced, students, et cetera. And so to fast forward, over 20 years later, to see that the new mission is to change banking for good is just really bold and empowering, and we're incredibly excited about that. We're looking for ways to foster and support diversification of the workforces in all of our various businesses that support our communities. That includes things like really tough conversations that we're having internally around what are the requirements for certain jobs, and why do we continue to rely on a 4-year college requirement? There's a lot of discourse happening around it. We haven't, sort of landed in a spot, but these are the kinds of things that are on the table. We're really keen to serve the financial needs of our community, which is, again, such a part of our origin story. We've been really deliberate about how we also integrate philanthropic initiatives into our business model, really trying to drive that authentic sort of, kind of impactful engagement. And as I said earlier, this work is so very much in the hearts of our associates. We launched something called the 1717 Project in Richmond, Virginia, where Capital One donated a building that we owned and turned it into an incubator for small businesses. And it was so heartwarming a few weeks ago when we delivered some checks to some of the restaurateurs, small business owners who participated in that incubator. And just the outpouring of gratitude for that partnership and that relationship, and the "but for Capital One" messages that flooded into my inbox, really sort of tell me that we're living that mission, because that was largely work that was really done by our associates who sit within the footprint of our Richmond businesses, really helping those entrepreneurs to figure out how to scale their companies. We're continuing to think about ways to amplify the grant dollars that we give to market. So I talked about employee volunteerism and us acting as consultants and leveraging our skills. That's something that's very important to us. Historically, there's been a lot of discussions when organizations are being funded about, can the organization consume this funding? Can they scale to sort of absorb this funding? And our new language now is, we believe in the cause, we believe in the path that we're on. What are the other things that we can do to amplify that impact, whether it's through our growth consulting initiative? Would it be helpful to have one of our executives on the board? What are some of the other things that we could do? Could we make an investment? Could we be a seed funder and help to just spread the message to other corporates or to other foundations where these groups may not be on their radar? So we're thinking about our impact and amplifying our impact in a much more holistic way, and really trying to increase access of all of the resources that we have available, whether financial or skill-based, to all those who need it. And then I mentioned our Capital One Impact Initiative, which launched last year. And the focus of that initiative is really on advancing economic mobility. It's about inclusive society, about building thriving communities through affordable housing, but also digital access, workforce development, job creation, creating financial tools that really help to enrich lives, providing support to our small businesses.
You mentioned the conversations that have been happening internally around the diversification of your workforce. Can you speak to the importance of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion as it relates to the work that you do in the community?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, we have a very strong partnership with Capital One's diversity and inclusion team. I think we feel tremendous responsibility to be transparent in our practices and to, look under rocks everywhere as we're developing new products, as we're evolving products, to do look backs on our existing portfolios. And this is a mission and something that I know, is not only felt by folks who are doing community work, but it's something that I know our CEO, Rich Fairbank, cares very deeply about. And I have, had the benefit of sitting in conversations, tough conversations, that he and senior leaders across our businesses are engaging in to look at places where we could change our practices. We could simplify products, and in some instances in ways that may be impactful to our bottom line. But again, this mission is really sort of felt that deeply. Our work doesn't happen in a silo, as I said, and so we're incredibly connected to the diversity, inclusion, and belonging teams. As we look for ways to deepen our commitment to end inequality on all fronts. The DIB team has set up the Capital One Racial Equity Initiative, and that's a series of things from executive training to workforce development and other things that the community team is very closely partnered with. Our main strategy really centers around 4 priorities, which is creating a culture of belonging where everyone can thrive. So that means both our associates internally, but also people in the communities where we serve. Ensuring our systems and programs really promote fairness and equity, being able to attract and develop talent from all backgrounds and experiences. And so we're doing that through a number of innovative programs that are looking to source talent from people who have what's considered alternative backgrounds. And then really investing in underserved communities, enabling the success of diverse businesses, and really supporting organizations that are looking to remove barriers and expand economic opportunity. How do we measure success? We think about that both in terms of the immediate impact of the investments of dollars and time and skills that we make. But we're also thinking about other measures that, may have a longer time scale. And how do we continue to build on and create momentum? One of the things that's fascinating to me coming into the world of corporate philanthropy is, and we've had a lot of debates about this in our team, is, what is the goal here? Is it to spread the dollars around, or do we need to be kind of more deliberate and intentional about how we allocate funds? When we come into a community, are we just solving one problem, a problem of, let's say affordable housing or of education? Or are we really looking to solve the gamut of problems for that community in order to avoid a whack-a-mole situation? And so, it's this sort of long-term collective view and focus on our accountability that's really helping to strengthen our commitments to our partners and to our communities.
One of the other things you mentioned that was built into the foundation of Capital One is that they use data and analytics from the beginning to learn more about their communities and communities that were underserved. How does research inform Capital One's community efforts?
Yeah, such a great question. I think that the challenges that are before us are age-old problems. Many are centuries old, right? As we've had so much dialogue about in the last year. And so I really think that if we hope to have a meaningful, sustained impact, it's really important that we go back and take a fresh look at the data, that we really ask ourselves, why? How did we get here? And so I think research plays an invaluable role in helping us to look at these problems in different ways. I don't think that we're going to find solutions by continuing to do what we've always done. Just this month, Capital One launched its Capital One Insight Center, which really combines research that we've done internally with Capital One and some of the information we've been able to glean through our partnerships to produce insights around what have been some of the underlying factors that have prevented us from having an equitable and inclusive society. The center published the Road to Recovery report, which talks a lot about differential economic experiences that various segments of the community have seen as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's really helped to shed light on some of the systemic financial inequities that we're looking to combat. I'd encourage folks to take a look. There are reports within that talk about impacts to low and moderate income communities, pieces on housing, pieces on implications for women. And I think that the more that we as a community can start to center on some of those kind of core hypotheses and theses of how we got here will help to enable our ability to really have a sustained impact in solving the problems.
The problems that you're tackling are, as you said, centuries old in some cases, and there are many different approaches to solving them. You, of course, are tackling them from a corporate perspective. What role do corporations play in creating a more equitable society?
One of the great leaders that I once worked for has been beating this drum for a long time and saying that really there is a clear responsibility that corporations have to come together with elected officials, but also partners who have been doing the work and who have been very proximate to these issues in the community to devise solutions. And what I mean is really working together in partnership from the get-go on what in understanding the problem, in helping to devise a strategy, and then in working on the execution piece of it. And I think the sooner that, kind of in the funnel that we can come together as partners, each with our own perspectives, I think is the better chances that we'll have at solving some of these issues. We as corporates spend a lot of our time really optimizing processes and thinking about ways to scale resources. We hire lots of great talent that's helping to drive ingenuity, and that together with folks who bring a lens of sort of empathy and understanding, I think can really help to drive meaningful change. We really have to get to the bottom of how we solve these problems for the disenfranchised, for folks who've been underrepresented, and for parts of the community that have just had systemic challenges built in, and who are unable, therefore, to really achieve the American dream.
Speaking of partners who are doing the work, part of Kerone's work includes amplifying Capital One's engagement with community partners that are focused on racial equity and economic opportunity. So we want to bring a couple of other voices into the conversation. Hana Haile-Mariam has dedicated her career to mission-driven work centered around equity and systemic change. She's the Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Robin Hood Foundation, which is dedicated to supporting low-income New Yorkers and lifting families out of poverty. Welcome, Hana.
Thank you for having me.
We also have Gary Cunningham, the President and CEO of Prosperity Now, which is focused on transforming our current systems, practices, and policies to create an economy that is just, fair, free of systemic racism, and one that works for everyone. Hi, Gary.
Thank you for having me. I'm so delighted to be here.
Thank you both so much for being here. Darren Walker, who is the president of the Ford Foundation, said recently that generosity is focused on helping someone in need. Justice is about solving the problems that created the need. So this question is for everyone. What do you believe is the correlation between philanthropy and justice? Hana, can you start us off?
Sure. First, I want to acknowledge and say thank you to Capital One, a close partner and supporter of Robinhood, and to my fellow panelists and you and Black Enterprise, Alyssa. I'm excited to be in this conversation with you. But to answer your question, I think if philanthropy does its job right, that philanthropy and justice should go hand in hand. And grant making should proactively look to support organizations that are dismantling systems and structures that put and keep people in poverty and have historically been unjust to low-income individuals and people of color. Key to that, from the philanthropic point of view, in my opinion, is investing in leaders of color who bring proximity and lived experience and intimately understand the needs of the communities they serve. You can't address poverty, which is at the root of the type of philanthropy many of us do, in particular at Robinhood, focusing here in New York City, without addressing the economic and racial injustices that underpin so much of it.
Darren?
Well, one, again, thank you to Capital One and Black Enterprise. I am such a fan. I am also on the advisory board for Capital One. So for the past 2 years, I've saw firsthand that they take difficult conversations. They actually take feedback well, and they're trying to make a difference in these communities. So I just want my hats off to Capital One for the work they're doing, and et cetera. But let me get to your question, because it is a deep question for communities of color, particularly the Black community right now. So several years ago, our organization did a study that basically showed that it would take over 250 years for African Americans to equal the wealth of whites today. And the similar data for Latinx, Latino populations. So we've got a big job ahead of us. As I was a funder for 10 years, know Darren well, and Ford Foundation's work is fantastic. However, we're going to have to actually create real systems change, and not just issues around mitigating the effects of a broken system. And so one of the things that I'd like to say here is that it is so critical that we have the support of the corporate sector, government, and the community in order to transform these issues. They're not going to happen overnight. Some of the remedies that we've worked on or working on are, for example, baby bonds, putting investments, long-term investments into young people so that when they get 18, they can buy their own home, so that they can actually buy a business, so that they can actually go to college without mounting debt. These are real solutions that we have to enact, because again, this is a long-term issue, and the number of organizations and folks that are working on it are vast. But philanthropy on itself isn't going to solve the problem. The amount of resources that they have, that they bring to the table, just won't be enough. And so it's going to take both governmental resources, philanthropic resources, and community movement to make this happen. Philanthropy is what they call a passing gear. It is set up, both in the corporate sector, independent and family foundations are set up to actually invest in and do experiment and do innovation in a field, so that those ideas and those concepts can be lifted up. So that others can take them on and implement them. And so part of the thing that philanthropy has to do is it has to be able to take real risk in creating innovation in the marketplace. If it doesn't do that, then it's not living up to the dream or the accountability that it should have. I mean, if you look at foundations, they're set up in part to provide, they get a tax exemption in order to provide funding on a variety of issues. I did a research paper a few years ago for Foundation Review on the issue of what is the role of foundations to address racial inequalities, the very subject we're talking about. And one of the things I found is foundations have been very helpful at times to the movement to change the conditions for African American people. And then at other times, they've also played on the other side of that role. And so they play both roles. And so what we need to be sure of today is that we're building a world and a place for African Americans and other people of color to have the ability, if you do the right thing, you work hard, you should be able to fully participate in our systems and structures. And I would argue that that is not true today, that our social contract has been broken. And so we need to reestablish that social contract. There are some good things on the horizon. The corporations through the Business Roundtable and other entities have come together and said, hey, we just can't serve shareholders. We have to serve everyone in our community. We have to have a commitment to everyone in our community. And many of them have made pledges to do so in building the infrastructure in communities of color, particularly Black communities, to make a difference. But those investments are just starting, and we've got a long way to go.
Kerone, did you have anything to add about the correlation between philanthropy and justice?
Well, I'll add a big preach it, brother Gary, because as Gary knows, we are huge fans of the work that Gary and the team are doing at Prosperity Now. But you know, Gary just really kind of laid it down. And I would just say, I think he's absolutely right. I think that philanthropy is the seed money, right? We are in the market to take the risks and to support innovative ideas. But you know, if we really want to see kind of enablement and advancement, it's about opportunity, meeting potential, and making sure that the systems and structures are set up to promote people's ability to excel. And where they are not, that's where I think the justice piece comes in. And so even in our own company, we're having a number of conversations about the extent to which we take our philanthropic efforts and apply them, you know, against organizations who are really trying to drive and promote social justice and equity. So critically important to remove those roadblocks.
A lot of our conversation today has centered on those people who are being left out of, or in some cases excluded from the economy. How does the lack of access and opportunity for Black and Brown communities affect the larger economy? And Gary, this time, let's start with you.
So, you know, I just go to a story. You know, I grew up in a community, a Black community, where there were very, very highly intelligent young people. And just tell the story of Leroy. Leroy was one of the smartest persons I ever met. He was so brilliant that he was just bored in school. And if somebody would have taken the opportunity to work with Leroy and actually tap into his talent, but he was stereotyped. His family was stereotyped. His family was redlined, meaning a system and a structure that actually didn't allow them to fully participate in our communities. Leroy actually did okay after a while of struggling, but Leroy should have had all of the advantages that everyone else in our society has to actually do well and to advance. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves in our democracy is, if everybody can't advance, if social mobility, meaning both social and class mobility, have been stagnated, not just for people of color, but for whites in our society. Middle-class whites are also struggling from the same dynamics of inequality, wealth inequality in America. People of color are struggling under a yoke of wealth inequality in America. And so we have to ask ourselves, do we have a full democracy if everybody can't participate fully in the economic systems and structures? And that's what we've been asking ourselves a question at Prosperity Now. We believe that asset and wealth creation sits at the cornerstone of our democracy. We believe that we can't mitigate the effects no longer of a broken system, that we really have to invest in changing that structure. What I've seen, and particularly in the corporate sector, and I just want to say this, there are hundreds, if not millions of people of color, particularly African Americans in the corporate sector, that actually want to use their skills, their abilities, their talents to make a difference in community. And we haven't built the bridges for that to happen well. Many times the agenda in the Black community isn't our agenda. It's actually been developed by folks that have other interests. And so one of the things we need to do is bring together the grassroots in the Black community with the grass tops so that we can actually define and develop our agenda so that we are actually moving in the same direction. If you take entrepreneurship as an example, Black MBAs have increased over the last 15 years by over 1,500%. So people of color are going to school, they're being educated, they have the ability to run major businesses, but 97% of our businesses are below $1 million in revenue. We're not in growth industries, right? We need to, think about that. We're in businesses, great businesses. People are working hard, but still the majority of our businesses are beauty shops, barbershops, restaurants. We're not a major player in IT, healthcare, and other growth industries. In fact, many of the corporate sector are struggling to find people of color to actually do business with them. And so we need a economic renaissance in the Black community. And I think we're poised to do that. I think there are enough people now in positions of power that actually can transform the scene that we're in. So I'm going to stop here, but what is critical for us is to control our own agenda and allow folks that really want to help us based on what our agenda that we've defined is.
Hana, as an advocate for those people who are being left out of the access and the opportunity, how is that affecting the larger economy?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is abundantly clear when looking at the racial wealth gap, which Gary was, touching on between white and Black families. The racial wealth gap is 90%. So it's more than just a moral imperative to change this, which I hope we all agree on, but purely from an economic point of view, when Black families have the means for economic security and agency, everyone benefits. It's estimated that closing the racial wealth gap could increase the US GDP by 1.5 trillion over the next 10 years. So when we all have an equal playing field, we all benefit.
And Kerone, as part of a financial services company, you of course have a unique perspective on how the larger economy is impacted when we leave communities out.
Yeah, absolutely. And that stat that Hana shared is just so earth-shattering, right? Because we know that in the US, we continue to add to the deficit. And so even if folks aren't on board or don't yet see it, haven't yet seen the light, I think that those stats are really mind-blowing. The reality is that, again, I just go back to this notion that we're all so inextricably tied to each other in this global economy. And so when we leave any community behind, we as a society are impacted. And it really is just so much the right thing to do. There is so much talent, like such a wealth of talent and expression that exists in Black and Brown communities that we really want to tap into to fuel, I think, really another kind of period of great innovation. I strongly believe that we're long overdue for another one of those. It's been a while since the computer was invented, as an example. And I think the more that we can sort of create that kind of level playing field, create opportunities for people who come from, atypical backgrounds, who may have had 2-year college degrees, but are killer software engineers. I think we have to level the playing field and create those entry points. Why is it that only someone who had immense success as a rapper is then allowed to enter the private equity market, right? Those talents, that business acumen, that was all formed, outside of performing music. So in so many of our communities, there are people who have that business acumen. Gary talked about the creating funds for children, but I think that there are so many opportunities to think differently about who are the people who have skill sets to become investors or engage in certain roles, and to level the playing field that way.
Hannah and Gary, your organizations are doing this work every single day. So I want to give each of you a chance to tell us how your organization is working to bridge the gaps in socioeconomic mobility. Hannah.
Sure. So mobility really is at the core of what we do at Robin Hood, ensuring that we are putting New Yorkers on a path to economic mobility and creating permanent, and I emphasize permanent, pathways out of poverty that can protect them from life occurrences that often force people into poverty. Things such as losing a job, having a baby, or experiencing an unexpected medical expense. 35% of adult New Yorkers who exit poverty fall back into poverty the following years, which is why I'm really emphasizing kind of permanent and sustainability. So we do this by having targeted interventions by focusing on life stages, so such as early childhood, school age, young adults, et cetera, and onwards. And we have certain milestones that are predictive of future economic stability at each stage. So for an example, for early childhood, a healthy birth weight, for later in your life, entering a mobility wage career, or when you're an adult, having stable and affordable housing. So we do this to really maximize impact at every stage of the life course. So this idea of sustainability and changing the trajectory of one's life and their family's lives for future generations and for good really is the goal. Last year, Robin Hood invested $172 million in over 900 of the most impactful nonprofits across New York City. And that included over 80 million in COVID-19 relief, which, as we all know, disproportionately hit New York City, at least initially.
Hannah, can you also share how the Power Fund is helping diverse leaders and in turn increasing mobility from poverty within the communities that those leaders support?
Sure. So just really quickly, a little context on the Power Fund. The Power Fund launched in the summer of 2020 after the horrific killing of George Floyd and the uproar that followed. We really, as an organization, had to reflect on the fact that while in the past decade, philanthropic giving had increased by nearly 400%, only about 10% of that went to leaders of color. So when you drill down into what percent of that went into women of color, many studies say it's even, it's less than 1%, which is a horrifying statistic. All that being said, we know that race is one of the strongest predictors of life outcomes across several areas, including life expectancy, academic achievement, health, among others. So the role philanthropy has in funding leaders of color who bring proximity, perspective, and expertise to their work is critical and important. So Robin Hood, as a philanthropic organization, had to really reflect on what the role was that we were playing in this disparity, particularly in a city like New York, where 80% of those living in poverty are people of color, and how we could ensure that the voices of leaders of color were at the forefront of the change we were trying to make. So the backbone of how we designed the Power Fund was really how could we address the barriers leaders of color face to getting and sustaining philanthropic funding and elevating their voices in the process. So with the guidance of an expert Power Fund advisory consisting of well-known grant makers like Cheryl Dorsey from Echoing Green, to experts on the intersection between racial injustice and economic injustice through their work like Khalil Muhammad from Harvard, Mark Morial from the National Urban League, we designed the Power Fund with three main pillars. The first being a large general operating and or programmatic grant to the leaders, knowing that in particular for leaders of color, general operating support is hard to come by. It's a big thing around trust and bias. Second, access to management assistance supports and non-financial supports. Robin Hood has always been very strong in this, but particularly we had an eye towards the barriers leaders of colors were facing. And then third, every leader got $50,000 in self-directed leadership elevation support to really support the leader's own professional development and elevation, which is rare for any leader to come by, but in particular for leaders of color. So to date, we are proud to have funded 17 organizations, 18 leaders, and continue to be on track to fund about 20 by the end of the year, thanks to great support from partners like Capital One. Of the 17 leaders, more than half of them are women, which makes me very happy. And just to pivot to answer a little bit of your question on how they're addressing mobility, we know, as I've mentioned a few times, that leaders of color bring a lens of lived experience to their work and community that inherently builds trust and addresses critical issues. So one of our Power Fund investments, to give you a prime example, was in America on Tech. Their mission is to prepare the next generation of technology leaders and decrease the economic wealth gap among low-income youth of color by doing so. So specifically, America on Tech creates effective pipelines to degrees and careers in the technology ecosystem by offering immersive programs for high schoolers, so including mentorship, internship, after-school programs, and alumni support. The two founders, Jessica Santana and Evan Robinson, were born and raised in Brownsville in East New York, Brooklyn, and they created America on Tech to really address the reality that there are very few people in the technology field who looked like them. Both graduates of New York City public school systems, K through 12, and first-generation college graduates, they learned 3 months after graduating college that they were already earning 4 times their family's annual household income working in technology. So motivated by this, and the understanding of economic opportunity now available, they left the corporate world to co-found America on Tech. They really are a prime example, of the lens leaders of color bring to their work and the communities they bring alongside with them. And we're very proud to have funded them through the Power Fund.
That is amazing work that both you and the organizations you fund are doing. Gary, can you speak about what Prosperity Now is doing when it comes to socioeconomic mobility?
I sure can, and thank you for the question. So Prosperity Now actually does several things. We're both a think tank and a do tank. We both think about things. We have a research arm. We have a policy arm that works at the federal level, but we also have programs that are working on the ground in communities. We believe that the answers don't come on high, that they are right in the community that exists, that the people and the wisdom is there already. We just need to harness that. Several years ago, I was the chair of the Association of Black Foundation Executive Board, and we did some analysis on some major Black nonprofit institutions and some on the ground. And we found that one of the major issues is the capacity of those organizations to perform, that many times grants come into communities, large grants from large foundations, but they don't get to the folks in the community. They actually go through what I call a sharecropping process before they actually get to the Black community. And so one of the things that we've done is started the high impact nonprofits of color. We're working in 20 cities across the country. Over 100 organizations are involved in our efforts to really build their back offices, to focus on leadership development, to focus on how are you managing your staff, to focusing on advocacy. How do you do policy advocacy? How do you do fundraising? And what we found through that process is that organizations are now better and more capable of carrying out the work. Because if we're going to have transformation in communities and we don't have the strength in these African-American led institutions, some of them are legacy institutions, it will make a difference. But we do a lot more than that. We are focused, we have 1 million children throughout America that are in our children's savings account program. And the children's savings accounts really are a cousin to baby bonds. And we know that if you make a $50 investment in a young person at birth, that they have a 4 times higher chance of matriculating through college. Just think about that, because somebody believed in them. And so we're really trying to expand not only baby bonds and get that implemented, because that is a real game changer, but also expand the level of children that are in savings account program. Not only that, but the parents then start saving. They start being part of the economic system as a part of that. We work with organizations on the ground to get people's taxes done. We were one of the groups that actually did the demonstration project for the Earned Income Tax Credit. The Earned Income Tax Credit is by far one of the #1 programs in America that have moved people out of poverty. And so what we do is we have a taxpayer opportunity network that actually is thousands of tax preparers throughout the country and organizations working on that, nonprofit organizations are part of this network, that when somebody comes in to get their taxes done, they can get them done for free. and they get signed up for all of these programs that are available to them, either at the state, local, or federal level, to actually give them the income, to give them the ability to move out of poverty so that they're not living day to day. 35% of Americans don't have 3 months of savings. So if something happens, and this happens to poor people a lot, something happens and then they don't have any kind of savings. They have nothing to fall back on. And so we've been working on this whole issue of how do we create emergency savings for folks that are in jobs that don't pay enough, so that they don't get disrupted all the time in their work. So those are a few of the things that we're working on. We have a network of 25,000 nonprofit organizations that we're working with on the ground that are advocating, that are providing services, that are making a difference day to day in the lives of community members. And we believe that by building this infrastructure, we can build the coalition necessary to transform this country, to move from an I society to an us society. And that's what we're trying to do at Prosperity Now.
This has been such an amazing conversation. And as we begin to wrap it up, my last question for all of you is that as the work to solve our society's deepest inequities continues, why do you think it's important for more diverse leaders to be positioned as experts? Hannah?
Sure. So, the short answer to me really is, it's an obvious one. They are experts. As I'm talking about, the 18 leaders that we funded, and I just talked about America on Tech, and I can think about so many of the other leaders we're funding just here in New York City. And there's many more than just 18 that just bring so much expertise and proximity to the work that they do. So to me, it really is just kind of an obvious one. So I would just say, out loud to our listeners who are listening to this, you have a voice and you have a vote. And in many instances, you have a budget, whether it's through your organization or personally, and you have the power to push for or make the change to see more diverse leaders in positions of power and really help people understand what I said earlier, which really is that when we all benefit, we all win.
Gary?
Wow, that was a great answer. I don't know if I could top that, Hannah. So the question of the jury is out, the data is in. Having a diverse leadership team for both corporate America or government or nonprofit is critical for these organizations' success. So there's no question that having a variety of opinions that have diverse experiences and background matter with regards to how successful, how you can establish as a corporation or as a foundation, a competitive advantage within your space. So I would answer it like that. I would also say that for African-American people in particular, we actually created Black Wall Street. We actually created the Harlem Renaissance. We actually have contributed both to the cultural and all kinds of aspects of our community. There are African Americans running major corporations in this country, many of whom I won't name, but they're there. We are there. We're running major institutions in the government. In fact, we've got somebody running the U.S., all U.S. armed forces in this country as a person of color. We've had a president that has run the whole country. So we actually have the ability and the wherewithal to create a renaissance of economic opportunity in our community, but it's going to have to be us working together in partnership with others, with corporate, everybody else. But is now everybody sitting here listening to this program, the weight of the history of the people that came before us is on our shoulders today. What we do, how we act, how we operate really will matter for the next generation. So somebody really sacrificed for me to sit in this chair and for all of you to sit there. Let's step up now.
And Kerone, I'm going to give you the last word. I think for me, it is quite obvious why we need diverse leaders like you, especially in corporate America. I mean, throughout this conversation, your passion and commitment to it has been obvious, but why is it important to you?
Oh my gosh, it's such a joy and an honor to sit at this table. And this is when I wish we were all in person, because I could talk to Hana and Gary for hours. There's a real lived experience that we bring to the table when we show up to do this work that is just so important. And as Gary highlighted, diversity of thought and opinion is so essential if we want to be revolutionary, if we want to have a renaissance and not just continue to sort of slightly tweak on the margins and slightly tweak what it is that we want to do. And so the call to action is very real. We all have a seat at this table, right? Whether it's an official seat, like the seat that Gary, Hana, and I sit in, or you just happen to sit in an organization and you think that more should be done. And so definitely take advantage of that opportunity to insert your perspective and to push things in the direction that they should go in, because this revolution is going to take a village. Brian Stevenson, who really imprinted me in such a meaningful way through his work, talks a lot about proximity. And I think, that's obvious and really important here, right? And about how the actual, it's in proximity that we really hear things that we wouldn't otherwise hear and see things that we wouldn't otherwise see. And so, I do think it's important that we have leaders of color at the table to do this work. But I also think that we all evolve in our journey. And for many of us, we may have started at a certain point in our life and have evolved economically to a different place. And so I also want to underscore just the critical importance of building the right partnerships with people who continue to be in the community and continue to tap into and have an ear to the ground, and who are able to reflect the voices of the people that we serve. Because it's not just in our color and in our own lived experiences that we're going to solve this problem, but it's by doing the hard work to continue to remain proximate to what's unfolding right now, contemporaneously, that we're really gonna help to drive change in this space.
Well, thank you, Kerone. Thank you, Hana, and thank you, Gary, for joining us here today. Thank you to Capital One for bringing us this important series on equity, and thank you all for watching On the Clock.